All right, so where was I? I'm in my room. The computer is on in front of me with my microphone set up, and there's a notepad open with notes about my podcast. It's time to rewind. It looks like they're open to the 16th scene of Memento that starts in black and white at 38 minutes and 21 seconds with Leonard on the phone talking about Sammy being tested for several months and ends at 39 minutes and 8 seconds with Leonard saying how habit and routine make his life possible. There also appears to be a Skype window open. Hang on. Who is this?
Hey, Bubba, it's Lisa Leaheey from Rabbit Hole Podcasts. You've heard me before. I'm on Between the Scares and Pictures and Conversations, a Rabbit Hole podcast book club.
Oh, that's right. So, although I do prefer to be called Bubbawheat, and there's someone else here. Who are you?
Bubbawheat. This is Richard Kirkham from the Lambcast. The one who can't make memories or who needs to have a podcast to be able to remember what he's seen.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Welcome back, both of you. We're still in this hotel room, as we will be through the vast majority of these black and white scenes.
Hey, it's good for consistency.
Yeah.
I feel I'm overdressed.
Yeah, I do have tattoos, but none on my chest, surprisingly enough. Let's go ahead and jump into this as we start to get into this little montage of this repeated negative reinforcement test. And I think it's interesting in the director's commentary, Christopher Nolan mentioned that in the original script, the Sammy story was supposed to be told in just a single sequence, but he thought that it was too important to the story and to help tell about Leonard's condition that they actually spaced it out to where it is now, which covers 4 separate scenes.
I mean, it really does show the frustration of what's going on here. You have this montage and this repeated sequence of Sammy's response to these electrified objects. And so, again and again and again, the frustration of what he's going through and being tested this way just hammers home what's actually happening.
Now, this is one of those places where I think the storytelling is a little problematic with the theme that they've got going on here, because if he's not supposed to have any recall of what's happened and he's going through these repeatedly, it seems strange that he looks increasingly stressed as we look at this sequence of events in the testing process. I mean, this first one in this particular scene, for instance, he looks beaten down like you can't believe. Like he's going, it's like he's at the end of a sequence of these things. It's almost as if they've done this sequence backwards also, where we're seeing him at the tail end of a sequence of tests that he has continuously failed. But from the very beginning, he looks defeated. And it would seem like maybe he would look different in every one of these situations. I'm going to have to watch it again as we go through this to double check that.
I did just notice, I mean, it goes by so quickly, but in every clip, he is wearing a different outfit.
Yeah.
And I think that's a nice bit of consistency. And like you said, at least as we're shown here, we're seeing him always pick up the exact same electrified object. And, they hints that there's multiple electrified objects. But I'm curious, do you think that this is all, he always picks up the first 2 in the exact same order as he's doing these tests? Or do you think that maybe he does a slightly different order? Because we do see, he's always picking up the pyramid, and we do see him, increasingly hesitate. Because the first time they show the hand, it's, he hesitates for just half a second. And then the next time they show the hand heading towards the pyramid, he hesitates for a full second. And then the third time they show it, his hand is shaking as he's heading for it. And it takes him a full 2 to 3 seconds before he picks it up.
Which is interesting because they're showing you, you're being given information here. And the suggestion is that this repetition, this conditioning doesn't work, but clearly something is registering.
Mhm.
And yet you would think that, the doctor would notice, or something would come through. And the suggestion is that Leonard is telling whoever's on the phone that, nope, he just kept doing the same thing and it didn't work. And it showed that his problem wasn't physical. It had to be psychological. He's not
Except,
covered, Go ahead.
yeah. Well, I was just going to say that, and I think we later discover that Leonard recognizes the fault in his reasoning here, and I think I've just recognized a reason why this might be continuously happening in the way that it does. We've talked about it before. He can learn, he can do things that he learned before his incident, before his accident. How many? Do you tie your shoes in the same order every day? Do you put on the same shoe in the same order each day? The same thing with your pant legs? Do you, when you eat your food, do you eat it in a particular order when it's on the plate? A lot of people do those kinds of things.
Right.
And I think most of us do some of those things, like we talked about, without even thinking about it. Riding a bicycle or driving a car. If you have, like looking at the objects there, maybe there's a reason he picks them up in that particular order, because of the size, or because he's working from right to left, or because it's just there's something that's familiar about the objects, and that's why he keeps going to that pyramid object. It may not have anything to do with the test itself. It could very easily be a reference to something that he's taught himself to do in the past. It's just like organizing your desk. My pencils go on the right, my pens go on the left. The paper goes in the drawer. The paper clips have to be within arm's reach. The stapler has to be up on the shelf. People have systems for doing things, and I would think the more systematic you were, the harder it would be to change that, even if you are being conditioned, supposedly, by this aversion therapy.
Well, it's absolutely true, because he's a CPA. Of course he's regimented. This is what he does.
And a little bit more of that, brief research that I did into the actual anterior grade memory loss is that I do think that the way this is presented is a flawed test, because I was looking up, I did find just a brief little information about how people with this real condition are actually able to learn and to cope with this disorder. And one of the, it gives 3 different techniques. And the first one, it's called errorless learning. Instead of learning from mistakes, because someone with amnesia can't learn this way. And I think that reading that, it fits exactly with this sort of test, because he's not able to learn from his mistakes.
Right.
And this is exactly what this test would be focusing on. And it says that in errorless learning, the method focuses on giving hints and prompts. And because the hints and prompts help your brain rebuild and strengthen connections and networks that you rely on for your memory. It also has procedural learning, which is the method focusing heavily on repetition and practice, which is what Leonard describes as the way that he has been able to learn. And there's also priming, which is a technique that involves giving a cue to help someone learn. And the cues train the person's brain on how to act next. And I think that also is exactly tied to how we're shown how Leonard is able to function and create new memories through his tattoos, because the tattoos are the cue. And basically anytime he sees the Remember Sammy Jenkins tattoo, that's the cue that tells him how to act next after he sees that.
Right. And I mean, frankly, he talks about how this is not a physical problem, but Sammy, through going through this test, shows that he is unable to put that muscle memory together, like to be able to do these things. And so it frankly is physical, like something is not working in the mechanics of his body. Right. And so it is just one more flawed element of it.
And I'll give you another flawed element of it. The people who are running this test, the test is paid for and covered by the insurance company that is looking to get out of having to pay for his condition. And as a result, the selection of how to test becomes problematic. Is it really going to reflect his true condition, or is this just the procedure that works best, that fits their narrative, that this is in fact psychological as opposed to physical? Leonard thinks that he's made the inference and the conclusion, and we know that he's not a doctor. He's just the investigator, but he sees himself as being insightful and able to read people. That's the thing that he kind of prided himself on. Of course, as we discover elsewhere, he's imperfect at that too.
Well, I mean, one of the previous scenes, we didn't even bring this up. He talks about how this was his first major investigation. So he can't even pride himself on reading people in this scenario because this is his first major one that actually challenged him. So what evidence does he have that he's so good at reading people, because this is only his first try?
Yeah, and I do think that it's interesting, how you mentioned like the insurance company is paying for these tests, and that's just a slight dig at insurance companies that's they're willing to pay for months of tests if it's going to get them out of paying years of support.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to cast aspersions on insurance companies, but I know that they're always looking at the bottom line. I had a friend who worked in insurance defense, and that's exactly the kind of stuff that they did. How can we get out of this?
I've been on the other side of it, so I'm going to say, I may be a bit biased, but I'm going to confirm this is my experience as well.
And then the last half of this scene, it's focusing on Leonard talking about how he's different from Sammy, and I think that this is another just fantastic piece of acting from Guy Pearce, and it's enhanced by this very slow push in through the camera, because he is talking on the phone, but he's like looking very straightforward. He's looking very emotionless as he's talking about himself and how he's different from Sammy. And that really reminds me of the opening scene whenever he's talking about, like, whenever he's getting ready to kill Teddy. Mm-hmm. It's that very similar emotionless, like he's detached, showing how different of a person he is, and just that he's just going over these facts very cold and emotionless and just very straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
He's supposed to be detached as an insurance investigator, but of course it's not possible to have that kind of detachment when your goal is to create this situation where the company that you work for doesn't have to pay for these kinds of things.
The whole system is a mess.
He's the evaluator and the judge, and it's just it's problematic. But I do think the comment about his acting in this particular sequence is fine. You're getting, again, just a phone conversation, the one-sided phone conversation, and everything is in the facial expressions, and he does have that very sedate expression on his face. His eyes are focused; they're not unfocused, but he's not. It doesn't look like he's thinking about something. It just looks like he's determined something. He's got a point that he's holding on to.
Yeah, and I feel like this is also an element of his own conditioning. Again, talking about what we brought up earlier with the fact that Sammy Jenkins' story is also his own story, and how he is repeating this almost, very rotely in order to help disassociate him. Like, at the same time, he's connecting his condition to Sammy's, but he's also removing himself from Sammy Jenkins, because conditioning and repetition works for him where it didn't work for Sammy. And that's this thing that he keeps repeating to himself to make that detachment.
Well, at least he thinks it worked for him. And then, of course, he keeps reminding himself or others that he never said it was that. Well, we get to that, that Sammy's faking, that it was psychological in nature.
Right.
But that's later.
Yeah, that's a bit more in the next scene where he talks about that. Yeah, this is still where he's talking about how repetition and conditioning didn't work for Sammy, but it works for him.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it makes his life possible, and that's what makes this movie possible too. And
Absolutely.
we do see a lot of those moments sprinkled throughout this movie. But yeah, this is another shorter scene. That's all the notes that I have. Do either of you have anything else that you want to bring up about this scene before we move on to the next one?
Nope.
There's nothing I can think of except maybe, Guy Pearce should get a mustache to go with this.
Yeah, that way he can match more with Teddy.
There you are.
All right. Well, thank you once again for joining us here, Richard. And for anybody else, why don't you go ahead and once again take a moment to let everybody else know where they can find you online.
Well, you can find me online at Kirkham, a Movie a Day. That's my personal blog site where every film that I see in a theater is going to get some kind of commentary. And then on a weekly basis, I'm on a podcast where we lie to ourselves every week. The Lambcast, Large Association of Movie Blogs. We're the official podcast.
And thank you, Lisa, as always, for being my co-host through these black and white segments.
It's always a pleasure being here with you, Bubba.
And I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me on Twitter where I'm at Bubbawheat. And you can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. We also have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group. You can join that and discuss episodes as they come out, as well as have discussions about time loop movies and TV shows, and also be informed about what movies or TV shows we'll be covering on future seasons. But until next time, I assume I've already told you about Memento?
Oh, only every time I see you.
Habit and routine make my life possible. Conditioning. Acting on instinct.